Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish for this Sunday, the 17th of November. As regulars to the programme will know, this is our weekly review of the headlines of the past week. And speaking of regulars, I'm pleased to welcome back two regulars to the programme who have given up time on their Sunday to join us and comment on the stories. The first guest is Sandra White, was a long-time constituency MP for Glasgow Kelvin, retiring in 2021, having served on just about every committee imaginable in Scottish Parliament. And as Sandra bowed out, our other guest, Paul McLennan, joins MSP for East Lothian. And that was from 2021, and from 2023 he has been serving as the Minister of Housing in the Scottish Government. So welcome to you both.
Morning.
Thank you.
Afternoon, I should say now.
It is. It's taken me many months to get my head around the fact that it's afternoon when this starts. Well, we start today, as we always do, with an update from Ukraine on day 998 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. President Biden has urged China's leader Xi Jinping to dissuade North Korea from deepening its support for Russia's war on Ukraine, after Pyongyang's deployment of troops in Moscow's war have raised concerns in Washington, Beijing, and European capitals. In their final meeting before the Trump administration takes over, the two leaders met Saturday on the sidelines of the annual Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Biden pointed out that China's publicly stated position with respect to the war in Ukraine is there should be no escalation, no broadening of the conflict, and the introduction of DPRK troops runs foursquare against that. Japan's foreign minister arrived in Kyiv on Saturday to discuss North Korea's deepening military alliance with Russia, including the deployment of thousands of troops. Takeshi Iwaya will meet his Ukrainian counterpart Andrei Sybiha to reaffirm Japan's strong support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion and to discuss further sanctions against Moscow. He warned Saturday that North Korean troops entering the Ukraine conflict would have a, quote, extremely significant effect on East Asian security. UK MPs and peers from all parties have called on the government to back Ukraine's demands for a just peace, with diplomatic pressure and military aid. Volodymyr Zelensky endorsed a rapid push to broker a deal on Saturday. From our side, we must do everything so that this war ends next year, ends through diplomatic means, he told Ukrainian radio. February 2025 would mark the third anniversary of Moscow's invasion, with Russia's troops gaining ground in recent months against Kyiv's outmanned and outgunned soldiers. On Saturday, the G7, which includes many of Kyiv's key backers, said Russia remained the sole obstacle to a just peace in Ukraine, pledging sanctions targeting Moscow. We will remain united by Ukraine's side, the group of 7 industrialized nations said in a statement marking 1,000 days of the invasion. The G7 confirms its commitment to imposing severe costs on Russia through sanctions, export controls, and other effective measures, the statement added. Russia's defense ministry said its forces had captured 2 more villages in the eastern Donetsk region, Makarivka, southwest of the key town of Kurakova, and Krikharivka, north of Kurakova. Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces made no mention of either village. Moscow's forces are bearing down on Kurakova, which has a thermal power plant and is 7 kilometers from Pokrovsk, a large town which for much of the war has been one of Ukraine's logistical linchpins. Zelensky said on Saturday that Russian forces were suffering heavy losses and that the advance had slowed down in some areas. A group of 4 Russian and Belarusian nationals detained in the Central African state of Chad for more than a month flew back to Moscow on Saturday. Russian media reported. State news agency RIA said the group included Maxim Shugaray, identified as a sociologist, but described by Western institutions as an official link to Russia's Wagner Group, a private army. Shugale is subject to EU sanctions on grounds of overseeing disinformation campaigns to promote Wagner in Africa. Well, we saw overnight one of the heaviest missile and drone attacks on Ukraine this year, with Kyiv especially targeted. I dare say we will be speaking about Mr. Trump on various occasions through this program, but he did say that he would get this war sorted out in a couple of days, and reportedly he had a telephone conversation with Putin this week, telling Putin not to escalate. Well, judging by the overnight attack, that seems to have had no effect whatsoever, and equally the telephone call from Olaf Scholz seems to have had no effect on Putin. So, Sandra, is there any point in these discussions? Does Putin understand anything other than force?
I honestly don't think there is. I know we always talk about diplomatic, discussions, diplomacy, etc., but it's not being adhered to at all. And we talk about, obviously, Putin and Zelensky. We never mention NATO, and that's always something that I always mention in this when we're speaking about Ukraine, who are going through, the ordinary citizens are going through an absolutely horrendous time. I don't think anything will come out of it. I think more people will die, unfortunately. More people will be taken into the army, particularly in Ukraine, as we see. And I really fear that this war will not end. The only people who are making anything out of this is the arms manufacturers creating war. But I think somebody's got to ask, what is NATO's role in this? What has its role been from the very beginning? They're very silent. Nobody talks about NATO putting up more bases, etc., around Russia. So I would prefer to talk about the NATO situation, because what they've basically done, as far as I'm concerned, is escalated this war between Russia and Ukraine, and it's the ordinary citizens that are suffering. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all talk, and nothing ever comes out of it.
Okay, thank you. Well, Paul, Sandra has mentioned NATO there, and it's worth pointing out that NATO has got no boots on the ground in Ukraine, despite talk at various times of possibly doing so. And equally, President Zelensky would say that his arms have been tied by weapons from NATO, and particularly the United States and Germany not being allowed to be fired deep into Russia. So what's your take on the situation?
I think Trump's been emboldened. Putin's been emboldened by Trump's election. I think it's as simple as that. Trump has come out and said he would end the war within a couple of days, and I think what he says that is literally trying to draw the lines about where the war is at the moment, and literally trying to look at it that way. I think Sandra's right mentioning NATO, but in terms of where NATO is, Trump is not a supporter of NATO. He said that in the past. It's very much America first. If he thinks that the war is of no benefit to him, he will withdraw funding, and he's already said that he will withdraw funding from the States. And if he does that, then NATO is in a really weakened position, because I can't then see NATO coming out and trying to try and fill that gap. They can't, in terms of militarily, in terms of intelligence, in terms of that broader support. NATO can't fill that. They just can't. So I think it leaves President Zelensky in a really weakened position, and Trump's set his hand out, and I think Putin's been emboldened by that, pure and simple. And the very fact that just a couple of days after Trump is elected, we see one of the heaviest attacks as we come into winter time, tackling energy sites. I think Putin's emboldened by what Trump said, and I wouldn't be surprised within the next week or two you see Trump coming in and trying to say, look, let's negotiate a peace. And I think if he withdraws the funding, I'm not seeing much where in NATO or where Europe could go, because I don't think they've got the capabilities, the military capabilities to do so, or the financial capabilities also. So I think we're already seeing one of the downsides of a Trump election already.
Okay, thank you. I dare say we will speak about other potential downsides as the programme continues. But the Middle East now, and at least 43,799 Palestinians have been killed and 103,601 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, and more than 3,445 have been killed and 14,599 wounded in Lebanon. An Israeli air raid on a UN-run school in Gaza City's Shati refugee camp killed 10 people, and Israeli bombs Lebanon 145 times in one day. Right-wing Israeli settlers welcome Trump and his cabinet picks. So those are the headlines, but there are lots of things to unpick behind the headlines, not least the UK's position on this, and both Starmer and David Lammy saying that this is not genocide. The surgeon who was in Gaza saying that Starmer should give back his law degree if he doesn't recognise it as genocide. And Francesca Albanese, the UN rapporteur, had pretty strong words for David Lammy. So, Sandra, what's your view of the UK government's position on Gaza and the Middle East?
I think it's disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. They're sitting back and genocide is being committed. You mentioned, 43,000 dead. Other sources put it at could be 100,000 dead. Whole families wiped out. We sit back and say we don't see that as genocide. Well, if they don't see it as genocide, the public see it as genocide, and it's been proven as it is genocide. The biggest problem I feel, and I think others feel as well, is this isn't going to end at all. It's, you quite rightly mentioned Trump in regards to that now. A huge number of his cabinet support Israel. A number of them, as you've mentioned, support the settlers. They wish, basically Palestine to not exist. They support the genocide that is happening. And here the West, the UK included, are sitting back. I really don't know how people can sleep at night when they see the horrendous pictures and then the evidence coming out of Gaza and then going in, obviously, to Lebanon. And you know exactly what they want. They've already said that. They wish to create a huge Israel and wipe out the people that are there as well. And that's the part I can't understand, is why we sit back and take this. Why are the West not doing more to basically, similar they did to Russia and Putin, basically? I mean, why are we not stopping the arms? I just can't understand why we aren't doing anything. Israel has not abided by any of the international laws. In fact, they've accused the UN, UNRWA, everybody else that doesn't agree with them as basically saying that they're Hamas as well. So I don't know where this will end if we don't intervene, stop the arms sales, and basically, sanction, Israel. That's the only way we're going to do that. The ordinary public are doing it. We're out marching every weekend throughout the world, and yet the governments, the so-called people in power, just sit back and take it. And I think Lammy and Starmer basically should be ashamed of themselves, and they should be taken to the Hague. It will come eventually, whenever we get to the end of this, but the whole situation in the Middle East is very, very dangerous, and Palestinians obviously are being massacred every day, as they are in Lebanon as well, and moving on into Syria. It will come eventually, and the Arab world shouldn't be sitting back either. They can talk, but they need to do something. It has to come along with sanctions. People should not be suffering like this. Basically, that's my take on it, and I think it's most people's take on it, that we need to put in sanctions, stop the arms sales, and basically, Israel has to come, well, if you want to talk about diplomatic talks, but they won't do it because they've said it all along. They wish to completely annihilate the Palestinian people and then they're already moved in to other parts of the Middle East as well.
Yes, thank you. As you say, the government does seem to be very out of step with public opinion on this. Moving on from what you said about the UK's involvement, you mentioned Trump. Paul, again, Trump said he would sort out the Middle East in a couple of days and end the war. It's probably worth pointing out, both in terms of the Middle East and Ukraine, that his last administration, he made the promise. His two big foreign policy announcements were he was going to have a super deal for the Middle East. Well, we see how that's turned out. He also said he would get Mexico to pay for his famous wall, which didn't happen. So, can we take his promises of what he's going to do seriously this time around?
No, absolutely not. And I think Sandra's right. This is part of a wider realignment that Israel sees as this, and I think it got the green light from a Biden administration to do that. It will certainly get a green light from a Trump administration to do the same, probably to a greater extent. As Sandra said, I think some of the people within the Trump administration have quite clearly said that Gaza should be part of a wider Israeli settlement, I suppose, strategy, and I think that's where you kind of seen. I think when you look at Lebanon, you can kind of see that as well. So I think Israel sees this as a wider realignment opportunity. And again, it comes back, and Sandra's right, in terms of who finances this. It's United States that finances it. Bottom line, Israel couldn't survive as a nation without the US finance, and it certainly can't survive without US arms. But and that we kind of expect. But what's completely wrong is in terms of where the UK government kind of comes in. They made a token gesture, I think, and talk about stopping some Israeli arms. It was something like about 5 to 10%. So 90% of arms that we were selling before are still going there. So the UK is still doing that. I think it's interesting also in terms of where kind of Putin sits within this, because in previous, I suppose, conflict in the Middle East, the Russians always used to sit on the side of the Arab nations. This time, you're hardly seeing any involvement at all from Putin, and I think that would be part of discussions between Trump and Putin. And you're right, I think it will be a case in terms of who holds Israel to account. At the moment, it's not the UK, it's not the US. The UN has very little power because in terms of having the permanent members, the UK and the US will just veto anything that kind of comes forward. So, and as in terms of where we see this as genocide or not, I think it's very clear coming from the actual experts in the field who are basically saying it is genocide, and by every context and every way we look at this is genocide. And yet we see very little involvement from the UK, either in terms of stopping arms, looking at sanctions, making any moves within the UN, talking about peacekeeping, and actually trying to say to the United States as well, you need to change your view on this, because again, if the United States stopped its funding, this war wouldn't exist. Simple. Absolutely simple. So again, Trump holds the aces, but my fear, like Sandra, is where does this war stop? And where does the US see where it can strengthen its strategic objectives, hiding behind the Israelis, who obviously just want to expand Israel as far as they possibly can. And there's no push towards peace in any way, shape, or form, and that's just and this is playing between governments and egos of leaders, while thousands upon thousands of people, including young children, die. It's wrong. It's completely wrong. And like Sandra, I fail to see where any optimistic outcome of this in the short term goes from. But we have the powers to do something about it. The UK could stand up. Scotland's already done that, but the UK could stand up and stop the arms, stop the funding. But it's seen as an important, I suppose, an important part of trying to get some support from some constituents who obviously live in predominantly constituencies down south, who obviously make an impact on voting down there. So it's sad. It's sad. Really, really sad as we see thousands of people die every single day.
Yes, very, very hard to. Sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
Just a wee addendum there. I mean, Paul was saying is absolutely correct. Yeah, it is sad, it's grotesque, but it has far bigger implications, particularly when, against UNRWA and against the UN, which is really saying, and people don't talk or look far enough to that, because obviously at the moment it's happening, and obviously the two vote against. I think there was 4 the last time against sanctions, etc. But that reverberates throughout the whole world. because the human rights issue could affect us or anybody. And I think there's a great danger of the UN and the peacekeeping forces, UNRWA, etc. Absolutely, well, UNRWA is really collapsing now. And if you take in the United Nations, which was set up to stop this, and Israel are just saying, we don't care, we'll just keep continuing doing what we do, that has implications of the world. Because that means that you could commit genocide anywhere and the UN doesn't stop it. So I think there's a big danger that these organisations are going to collapse, and people should be aware of that in regards to what's happening in Israel. Thank you for letting me in with that wee bit.
No, that's a valuable contribution, and I mean the UN has not covered itself in glory anywhere. I mean the same in Ukraine when Guterres went to bow in front of Putin, and somebody pointed out the predecessor of the United Nations when the then Soviet Union invaded Finland. They expelled the Soviet Union from the League, whereas here we've got the complete opposite: the Secretary General kowtowing to the invader. But I suppose it's also easy to blame the organisation as if the UN exists in a vacuum. It doesn't. It's the member states, and if there's not enough from them, you can't really hope for that much, can you?
You know, how can it be democracy if two states can stop everyone else? The rules have to change. Majority should count. And I think this is where it all falls down. They won't change it. I think the UN is in, difficulty, obviously, but it's going to collapse if they don't do something about it, because it will affect every single country. And we talk about Sudan, Yemen, all the other poor places that, horrific things are happening. And where's their human rights if the UN's not there to protect them?
Yeah, I feel you're right. Move on, and surprise, surprise, we come back to Mr. Trump again, and the discussion this week about his cabinet appointments. I should stress that he does not make appointments. That's a British concept or European concept. He makes nominations. So these people that he has named will not necessarily get through the Senate hearings. And equally, with the Ethics Committee investigation, and also the rumours surrounding the potential Defence Secretary, they may not even get as far as the nominations. But what's it all about? Somebody suggested to me that what Trump values above all else is loyalty. So he's made this token reward to these people to say, I will nominate you for whatever position. And knowing that they won't get through, and then he can say, oh, well, it was deep state that did that. I tried my best. Of course, there are lots of other possible explanations that he's got these headline ones to deflect from the real hardcore people he's putting into other positions. What do you think, Paul? What's your view on what's going on there?
I think you're right. I think he values loyalty above anything else, never mind who's the person fit for the job. And I think we can see that through either Matt Gaetz or Robert Kennedy Jr. I think these are highly controversial appointments. We've seen the situation that he's not appointed as of yet an education secretary because he's talked about abolishing the education department. I think loyalty is the main thing. I think there probably is a small number of Republican senators who might, push back against that, and that's something that he'll need to be conscious of, because I don't think if he hasn't, and some of his appointments don't go through, I think that weakens him slightly. But he's got the Senate and he's got the House, and so that makes it really difficult for it's going to be in the hands of probably 3 or 4 Republicans who might hold the sense of sanity within his appointments. I think in terms of looking at it, because the Democrats can't do very much about it, and it kind of sets. I mean, if you look at also as well, and who's talking about an influence, Elon Musk, it's crazy. It's almost crazy, and we can look at the bigger reasons about why he was elected, but he's got a pretty clear hand to do what he wants to do, and I think we're in the hands of 3 or 4 sensible Republicans who might make him change his mind. For example, Matt Gaetz or Robert Kennedy Jr. in terms of that, and even Elon Musk, which I think will go. He'll play a really important part, but the two other appointments, like Robert Kennedy Jr., who doesn't believe in vaccines, who doesn't believe in HIV and the link between HIV and AIDS, it's worrying. Let's see where he goes. But I think he may have to be more conscious in terms of who could vote against Gates and Robert Kennedy Jr., for example. And if he doesn't have an education secretary, which I think he has, I think at this situation, if I'm correct, that's not something that's in his choice. I think that's something that would have to go through either the House or the Senate in terms of that. But it's down to a few, hopefully sensible Republicans, which there are less and less of, to try and look at that in terms of that. But the loyalty thing will be his main thing. There's no doubt about it.
You mentioned those two appointments, and I would add to those also Tulsi Gabbard, who the Russian propagandists Kabayeva and Solovyev have described as our girlfriend. That has huge implications for Five Eyes security services. That is it going to be safe to share any intelligence with the United States with somebody like that in charge? And then his pick for the environment, the guy who's in charge of fracking. So it's not just the two. But I'm interested, Sandra, in your view on Elon Musk. And he appointed. He said, well, okay, he's going to look after efficiency. But the first thing he did as an efficiency measure was appoint two people to do one job, which seems rather ironic with Vivek Ramaswamy as well. So you've got three absolutely huge egos in the same room there. That's not going to end well, is it?
No, I don't. I don't think so. I think you see in other political parties, even this side of the water, if you get big egos, it doesn't work well at all. Elon Musk, I think when you look at his appointments, particularly Musk's appointment anyway, it's as if it's been run through Twitter, and we know that Elon Musk bankrolled his election campaign, etc. But you've also got is it Gantz, who was investigated for sex trafficking, and he is now the Attorney General, so you've got that. And bear in mind that actually Biden, when he's still in power obviously, he didn't follow through on the investigation. So you've got somebody that's been investigated for sex trafficking, and he's now the Attorney General. You've also got, as you've already mentioned, basically someone who I do have his name here, I think, Thomas Horton or Horan, who wants to get rid of what he calls illegal immigrants into the country. You've got that going on as well. And it's as if it's like Elon Musk is more in charge of all this publicity. That obviously attracts publicity. These two alone attracts publicity, basically. So Elon Musk, and we've known that he's been in on the conversations with Zelensky and others, Putin as well, I believe. Elon Musk was in on that telephone conversation. So I think he has got a lot more pull than people might think he has. And Trump, what is Trump? We say he's an idiot, but he's a very dangerous idiot. He's not necessarily got the money, but Musk has the money. And what is Musk's, we know what his role is, well, we think we know what his role is, but what is his end game, Musk's end game? I think he's a bigger player in this Trump's administration than a lot of people give credit. Well, credit's probably the wrong word. Looks at him, I think he'd be pulling a lot of strings. And he's very much a supporter of Israel as well. Is he against Russia, against Putin? I think that's debatable. Because you raised obviously about the lady who, is the person who's, has already mentioned a lot about Russia bringing it into the politics of America. That was a strange appointment altogether. But Musk hasn't really attacked Putin in the same way he's attacked others. Right wing, yeah, it's absolutely right wing. But his cabinet, I think he's appointing 15 out of 17 at the moment. They're all pretty right wing. And I would hope that I could say, as Paul had mentioned, that you had some sensible folk in it. But I can't see it because I think, there may be loyalty there. But if he doesn't get Trump his own way, they'll be as quickly put out as anybody else. I think Musk is the one that's pulling the strings here. He's the one with all the money, although, mind you, X, as he calls it, loads of people are leaving it now, basically. So I wonder if his empire, it won't collapse, but I wonder if it will go down a bit. I think Musk is the one who's pulling the strings here, and Trump is prepared to listen to him. He did everything during that whole election. So very dangerous times for America and for the rest of the world as well. And don't forget that, Trump has already said he put the American embassy in Jerusalem. And he's already said that will be the capital of the new Israel. So you've already get rumblings there, along with various other rumblings too, such as Paul had mentioned earlier, about NATO. Because what he's already said is the fact that America puts more money than anybody else. So therefore, if America pulls out, he wants Europe to pay the rest. They're involved in sending arms to, other countries. They don't have the money. So there's a big collapse coming along here. But I think Musk is behind a lot of it, actually. I think he pulls the strings.
Yeah, but again, two clashing egos. We'll have to see if Trump is not one who's willing to give a lot of credit to other people. So I think if he's overshadowed by Musk, that he's not going to stand for that. But move on now to climate summits. And COP29 has been so low key. There's been so little spoken about it compared to previous climate summits, and it seems to just have been controversy after controversy. The claim that it's been overrun by fossil fuel lobbyists, the scandal with the Azerbaijani representative. The UN is warning of economic carnage if the G20 leaders can't agree on climate finance for poor countries. Is the whole series of COP conferences dead and past its sell-by date? And also, I mentioned on that, to bring it back home, very small step, but a welcome one, that the Scottish Government has committed funds to Just Resilience programme, looking at best practice in the area and definitions for just resilience, and on a very practical level, £200,000 for testing of cholera vaccinations in Malawi and Zambia. Paul, your view on COP and its usefulness. Again, with this background of Trump as a climate denier. I mean, he's going to find his way into every story we have today.
Yeah, there's no doubt he is a climate denier, and I think that again that will have an impact. This will be one of the other downsides of Trump being elected. I think in terms of COP, we're probably past the point now of, I think it was 1.5 to keep it alive, and we're way past that now. And I think this is going to be, there's not serious politics being involved in this. We see people playing around about the edges. We're not taking the action that we require. It's been kicked into the long grass in terms of that. The very fact that Azerbaijan and obviously it's fossil fuel kind of background in terms of that. In a way, it's good it's been held there, but you can't see them as serious players, nor can you Russia, nor can you China, nor can you the States, nor can you India in terms of this. I think it's more mitigating what the impacts would be. We're not going to stop this. We're far beyond that. And I think the quicker people will realise that and call it out and start looking, because we're seeing what's already happened and just in Valencia a number of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And we've seen really heavy rainfall in other parts of Spain. That's going to happen, and we've seen it in Pakistan a couple of years ago, where there was thousands of people killed. We've moved way beyond that. There's not political will to do this, and I think we can do what we need to do in Scotland and play our part in the renewables revolution, if you like, is I think it leads the world in terms of what we're trying to do. But in terms of the big countries, including the UK, being serious about this, we're way past it. And they should just admit it instead of playing along and saying that they're trying to be serious about it, because they're not. They're absolutely not. In terms of that, and we're going to see, I think, probably in the next few years, you're going to see more of these floods. But on the other side, you're going to start seeing, there'll be more droughts and so on. So it's going to happen. But and it's changing the weather system. There's already talk around about the Gulf Stream slowing down, or even shutting off totally. Now, if that happens, then you're talking about real impacts for the Baltic countries, and for the Nordic countries, and for ourselves, where it could actually ironically see a really rapid cooling in terms of different parts of the northern hemisphere. So there are lots of issues around about there. But the big countries don't take it seriously. They've moved. They're way beyond that. Hate to say it, but we're way beyond it.
A gloomy view, but thank you. Sandra, have you anything to add to that?
I agree entirely with what Paul has said. As far as I'm concerned, it's another talking shop. In Azerbaijan, we have lots of fuel companies going along here as representatives, more of them than there are actually the smaller countries who are being represented. That's one thing. And also, all these countries using these jets, that's not good climate change either. And then you have the big countries, as Paul had already mentioned, but they're also, slave labour in some of the poorer countries that we're supposed to be saying we'll give money to, with the mining that's going on in various other, Africa, Congo, Colombia, all of these countries too. I mean, that, absolutely destroys, the ecosystem. But when you talk about, climate change and economic disaster, they never seem to talk about the disaster to the people that are there, basically. So I think it's just a talking shop. It won't go anywhere whatsoever until the bigger countries really take responsibility for the pollution that they are causing, and also the misery they're causing in other countries too.
Indeed. Thank you both. Moving closer to home now, and farming and the rural economy. The inheritance tax, which was produced in Rachel Reeves' budget, has attracted a lot of anger and worry from farmers. My understanding is that the fear is that you may own £1 million farm value on paper, and death duties come in, but there are no liquid assets, and the way that to pay the death duties will be to sell off part of the farm, possibly for housing, and this is going to erode the size of farms and cause a major impact on food security. I'll start with you, Paul. I know you live in and represent a rural area, and I saw you tweeting this week that there are more than 180 farms in East Lothian, so this is obviously something of real local concern to you.
Yeah, there's 187 farms I've got in my area, and probably about a third of East Lothian is rural. It's going to make a difference in terms of that. And I think the important thing, I think, for me is where if we're looking at taxation, where do we look at taxation around? And I think the inheritance tax part, and where the UK government have placed this, is very blunt, and quite frankly, it'll raise a certain amount of money. If we're going to be talking around about how we tackle it, then the Labour Party should have been braver and been like previous Labour parties and talked around about tackling wealth and tackling wealth and taxing wealth, and also taxing the people who could afford it the most, and that should be doing they tackled that. I think in terms of, if you're talking about £1 million for a farm, lots of farms in East Lothian will be impacted in that, so I think that's one part of it. The other important part of the budget as well, which I think is really important as well, before we had the certainty of EU funding, and that was part of the regular funding we got from the EU. Now what we're seeing from the UK government, and this is probably a bit more worrying, of course, it's now going to be Barnetised, if you like. So the fund won't be part of the overall settlement. It'll come in and it will be part of the overall settlement, so it could be Barnetised. So the funding at the moment is around about £600 million. That's likely, if it's a Barnett formula applies, it's likely to be more than halved. So it'll go down to less than £300 million. So again, because of UK government policies, Scottish business and Scottish farmers could, in terms of the 300 million, could be a 300 million impact. And again, we'll be asked to fund that, as we always are, in terms of that. So the inheritance tax, I think, is very blunt. Don't think it'll achieve what we need to do. I think if we're going to tackle the income tax question, it should be tackling wealth at source in terms of that. I think the inheritance tax is very, very blunt. I think it'll make an impact. There's 187 farms, but there's also there's a big supply sector around about that as well. So it employs more than a few thousand people in East Lothian. So But we need to look at that. It's been very bluntly used, but in terms of the wider implications of the UK budget, this is going to impact the farming community in a much bigger way as well. So Labour have got it all wrong. And John McTernan's comments basically saying, this is a chance to do to the farmers what Thatcher done to the miners is that's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that point and ask you, Sandra. We can't talk about the hill farms of Kelvin, but looking at it from the urban point of view, I mean, for years in the past, people criticised the Labour Party and saying it was a metropolitan party and it was out of touch with rural affairs and the countryside. But I mean, that statement by John McTernan that we don't need small farms, I mean, that just underlines it so much, and it's bizarre. I mean, I don't know how widespread the view is, but I mean, as you know, politics is as much about perception as anything else.
Yeah, I've met John McTernan in various guises during my political career. I don't think much of him. I think he's. I don't think much of him. I'll go as far to say that anyway. But he was advisor to Gordon Brown, so he had a very important position at that time. I think we need our rural farms. Yeah, I represented Kelvin, but I mean, I buy local as much as I possibly can, and there is a small farm. It's in Ayrshire. I won't give the name in case I'm accused of advertising, but they've started a crowdfunder. Basically, they supply to various schools, etc., and some local authorities, but they're not big enough. So I think we need to look at the smaller farms, basically, who are producing fantastic stuff, lots of Scottish produce, which we buy. They have shops here in Glasgow. But I think we need to, put our energies into the smaller farms. The huge big conglomerates own huge farming land, and the money and the profits go to them. I don't know if they pay tax or not, but I think it has to be looked at, the inheritance tax, when it's a smaller family-run farm. And I think that's where we should be starting, not just blanket inheritance tax for every farm.
Well, we're not the BBC, so you're freely allowed to advertise, and it's always good to have a shout out to a small business.
Do you want me to name the farm?
Do please.
Moskiel Farm, it's called, in Ayrshire.
Oh yeah, okay, I know the one. Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks both on that. And I mean, of course, it's not just the funding that you mentioned, Paul, on losing funding from Europe, but it's also the whole implications of Brexit and making food harder and more expensive to import. We're losing out on that too.
Yeah, and Sandra's right. Yeah, Sandra's right, because most of the farms in East Lothian have been family-owned farms for decades. So you've seen the family, so you get to know most of the families and most of the people there, and some of them are obviously wealthy in terms of that, but there are lots. There are 187. The vast majority are smaller farms. This impact £1 million worth of agricultural land it's not a lot. In terms of that, the value of the land's one thing. The profit they make from it is completely different, and there are a number of issues in about that, how they're controlled by the supermarkets and so on. Some of the profit margins in some of these smaller farms aren't great. This could tip some of these farms into being sold, and this is the point that Sandra makes. The big conglomerates come in and buy them up, and that's what you're going to be left with, is big conglomerate farms all over the place, and even less ability to do what we need to do, because we do need good quality Scottish food. The conglomerates will come in and just take over in terms of that. So the small farms are incredibly important. And, the constituency work I've had from, let's face it, it's not really an SNP supporting sector normally, but, there's been lots of real anger in terms of what's been shown. So, we're working with a lot of farmers and meeting with them next week to talk about this issue with a large number of them. So we'll see where it goes. But again, can't see Labour Party changing this, because I don't think they understand it at all either.
No, it seems to be it. Okay, well, we're going to stay with East Lothian now, and Ofgem has approved the new interconnector to take energy from East Lothian to Yorkshire. What does it mean for East Lothian? Are there any benefits in your constituency with this, or is this just losing Scotland's resources?
Douglas, is another thing. I think this has got to be almost where the energy regulation power sits. And again, that's obviously it sits within the UK government, and that's incredibly frustrating. In terms of East Lothian, this link is literally 10 miles away from me. When I was elected in 2021, there's lots of things in energy in terms of that. So we have Torness Nuclear Power Station, for example, which is in the constituency and is decommissioning shortly. We've got Berwick Bank, which would come onshore if it's approved, would come onshore in East Lothian. We've got Nartnaguia Wind Farm, which comes onshore in East Lothian. There's a number of other applications going in for solar power, for battery storage, and so on. So I set up an energy forum, which we have all the companies come along. So we set it up for a number of things. One was, where can we get local jobs? So we've got a skills group set up. One of the other thing was trying to set up a community benefits group. So strategically, what do we do with the community benefits? So we've set that group up. That involves the community council, involves the council as well in terms of strategically what do we need to do? Do we tackle field poverty? Well, so we've got at this stage saying that Scottish Power would be involved as part of that. Now, obviously, they're not generating, there's no profit coming from that. So, but in principle, they've said they would talk to us about that. So let's wait and see, and we'll hold them to account on that. There will be a short-term gain in terms of construction, but there's also pressures in terms of where do people stay. So that we'll bring construction people to the area, and there'll be a small number of people employed. I think it's about 50 employed as there. So it's short term, but in longer terms, the communities have to benefit. And I was up in Shetland just about a month ago at Cohigh, and we had Sullenvoe, we had Viken Wind Farm, and we have the irony of some of the highest energy costs in the whole of the UK is in Shetland, where a huge amount of energy is produced, and that's just wrong. So it will bring short-term benefits, but in terms of then what we need to do, we need energy regulation controlled in Scotland. Bottom line, absolute bottom line. And Octopus Energy chief executive came out and said that the cheapest energy should be in Scotland. Of course it should be. We just need the power to allow us to do that.
Yes, many people would agree with you on that, and I'm surprised. Perhaps I'm not listening hard enough, but I would have thought this would be the main attack line from the SNP leading up to the 2026 election. Just in the same way that it's Scotland's oil was the argument back in the late 70s. I'm not hearing that. How about you, Sandra?
No, I mean, I'm not, obviously, I'm not an elected member at the moment, retired, but certainly if I was an elected member, I'd be shouting from the rooftops that one Ofgem does not serve Scotland at all. I mean, these regulations were, I think it was started in 1933. It's about time they were absolutely changed. I'd be pushing, why are we not pushing even stronger for our own grid, as the Octopus Energy CEO had already mentioned that fact. Why aren't we doing that? Why have we got to pay to actually get, on to the grid when we're producing more and more of the electricity? And absolutely, it's good for the climate, what we are absolutely doing in renewables. So I'd be questioning that all the time. I'd have that constantly on the go. And there was a consultation from the Scottish Government in regards to regulations in regards to electricity renewals planning. Now, planning is devolved. Now, I'm not sure whether that type of planning in regards to energy is devolved, but certainly it's a consultation, and it finished, I think, in March this year, 2024. So I'd have been looking into that if I was elected. I would have been taking part in that consultation, because it was asking for, anybody had any concerns or addendums to or changes to this particular act that's there. So that's something I'd be starting on at this moment in time, because Ofgem are no good for Scotland. We are not going to get anything out of that. And, for this pipeline to go forward, surely it needs some form of planning permission from the Scottish Government. It's on our land, basically. So I don't see why we're not pushing that more and more and more, and constantly pushing for the fact that we want a grid in the north, a grid in Scotland, because once we're independent, that's what we need to be independent of our electricity and our energy as well. And why is it constantly on the price of gas when we're not based on the price of gas? It's renewables for us in Scotland. There's lots of questions that have to be asked, and I really think, the party, or the government, sorry, let me say the government is letting us down by not pushing this hard enough. And I'd like to see if anything has came out of this consultation, which was March 2024. I only read about it because I was being asked about it today, so I kind of looked it up and saw that. So I would maybe ask Paul to go back and
Yeah,
ask these questions of the Scottish Government. Surely planning must come into this somewhere because it is
yeah,
devolved. And if
yeah,
even just to highlight the fact that we need, to have a grid of our own, and two, what is planning? Do they have the powers to either stop it or demand X, Y, and Z? I mean, you have the situation with the free ports, which is not going down very well in lots of places, but the Scottish Government did manage to get some saviours from Freeport, from Westminster, i.e. decent wages, etc., etc. So I think we should be exploring that more and making more noise about it. It starts with the energy, which has been going for years, and then they're talking about the water. Where will it stop?
yeah.
Okay, do you want to
Just
come
on
back
that
to that
subject.
one?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Obviously, in terms of the planning, the building itself and anything round about it is determined by the local authority. In terms of the actual energy connection, it is determined by Ofgem. So that's we don't have any powers over that at all. In terms of that, so I think that's the key thing, and I think that's the legalities, because again, when we talk about Torness, I remember this is going back lots of years when Torness was being proposed, and going out and marching against Torness at the time, way back in the 1980s. And of course, we're now getting to a situation where Torness is coming to the end of its natural life, and there's been discussion about Torness too. So Scottish Government policy, as we know, is against nuclear power. I think the other thing, the council obviously have their part in their planning when it comes to the actual grid connection. That's still fully controlled by the UK government and by Ofgem ultimately. In terms of there's a wider energy strategy which has been delayed, which needs to come out, which I think will tackle that point, that thing, talking about grid connection, talking about what we need to do. And it would be if we were fully independent, we would have an energy strategy that would be focused towards Scotland, obviously looking at opportunities for export, but an energy system would serve the people of Scotland much better than it's been served at the moment, because Sandra's absolutely right, it doesn't serve Scotland well in any way, shape or form.
You look at
Yeah,
Northern
I mean, the bottom
Ireland.
line is that Portugal
Sorry.
produces 70% of its energy by renewables and has the lowest price of electricity in Europe. Scotland produces more than 100% and has the highest. So, I mean, it's obviously a topic which is going to touch very many people. Final thing today is something that we've mentioned already. Elon Musk and X, Twitter. There have been 1 million people a day moving from Twitter to Blue Sky. I notice both of you still are exclusively on Twitter. But you were saying, Sandra, earlier that this was the publicity machine for Trump through Musk. If these losses continue, it's potentially he's going to lose a lot of his influence, both with the public and his usefulness to Trump.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and maybe that's a good advert for us all to move over to another provider, basically, which I know a number of people have moved over but kept to Twitter until, obviously their followers know, and then move over to there. I've seriously thought about it myself, because Twitter is just, it's not X as he calls it, it's not the same as it was. It is very toxic, and it's full of Americanisms. It's not the same Twitter that I joined, or I think anybody joined. So I think a lot of people will move over, and I think Blue Sky seems to be the one that people are moving over to more than anything else. And yeah, his popularity within Trump, as you have mentioned, his loyalty, etc., I think it will fall. So that's a good enough advert, is it not, to move away from Twitter? And don't sue me, Mr. Musk, because I'm giving my opinion on that particular part.
So just a sort of quick yes, no from you, Paul. Are you going to move
Yes,
or
I'll
add
probably
blue
stay to
sky?
what Sandra said. Not yet, but I plan to do so this week in terms of that. And Sandra's right. I mean, the level of abuse that you get on Twitter is just it's disgusting, to be honest with you. So, but yes, I will be moving. I'll probably keep Twitter for a period of time as well, but I will be moving.
Okay, thanks very much. And I should just point out that Broadcasting Scotland maintains accounts on both Twitter and Blue Sky, but the growth in Blue Sky and the geographical reach seems to be much bigger, with a very large number of followers joining up over the last few days. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We set our current fundraising target in April, hoping to reach 36,000 by the end of the year. It's November and we've raised £16,500. However, to pay our bills and survive, we need to raise 12,000 now to get us back on target. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations around 2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We are at crisis point and really need your donations right now to be able to pay our bills and to survive. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Well, thank you very much today to my two guests, to Paul McLennan and to
Thank you,
Sandra,
Douglas.
for giving up your time on a Sunday for your valuable contributions.
Thank you as well, Douglas. Yep.
Thanks.
You're very welcome. And thank you to you, the viewers, whether you're watching now or on catch-up. Goodbye, enjoy your Sunday, have a good week, and please join us during the week on Broadcasting Scotland for our regular news programme in the evening. From me, goodbye.